Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Digital Law Podcast, brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Answer and Evaluate. So as a bit of background, we're a law firm that works solely on technology, cybersecurity and legal issues. In each episode, we look at stories in the law relating to digital technology from around the world, with an emphasis on data protection and cybersecurity. I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK, and I'm joined by my colleague Peter Wright. We're just going to run through some of the stories that have been coming up this week, so I'll pass over to Peter to introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Amelia. My name's Peter. I'm a solicitor and the managing director at Digital Law, and we've got a good range of stories this week, everything from a few breaches to things happening in the criminal courts, and then things happening when it comes to anti-competition, antitrust issues. So I'll pass back to Amelia to kick us off.
Thanks, Peter. So yeah, we are starting across the pond here, looking at antitrust issues, and that is an Apple lawsuit. So the US accused tech giant of monopolizing the smartphone market essentially here. I mean, I think you don't really have to be into the news to know that a lot of people do have Apple devices, Apple phones, etc., and they do hold quite a corner of the market here, don't they?
They do, and Apple is now one of the world's most largest companies, certainly one of the world's most profitable companies. Little wonder when you can, it costs like $800 for an iPhone 15, and anything pretty much that you go and look at in the Apple store tends to be fairly expensive. But of course, you have to get Apple products to work with Apple products. And having had this large share of the market for a very, very long time now, it's quite fun to think back to the days when Apple was the sort of shiny, brave upstart taking on sort of Microsoft and IBM, who were seen as the dominant market players at the time. And then you sort of, fast forward 15, 20 years and the roles have seemingly reversed. And certainly Apple's role has been very, very dominant now for a very long period of time. But interestingly, the US Attorney General, it looks like he is of the view that the means by which Apple has maintained that position may not be entirely in the spirit of the law.
I mean, so looking at one of the stories here, there is an 88-page complaint which focuses on kind of 5 key areas where Apple allegedly abused its power. So, for example, we've got the US alleges that Apple used its app review process to thwart development of so-called super apps and streaming apps, which it was worried would provide less incentive for customers to stick to iPhones. So I believe in one of our previous podcasts, we had talked about how Fortnite and Epic Games had come up against Apple and had actually filed a lawsuit against them. So that's kind of one example here of how people are realizing that maybe Apple isn't the best kind of way to go. We've also got then the fact that Apple has made it difficult to connect iPhones to smartwatches, which have been made by rivals. We've got then the issue of financial firms accessing its tap-to-pay technology, as everyone would know as Apple Pay, and also the way that Apple treats messages sent from rival phones. So you've got the whole green bubbles for normal phones, and you've got the blue bubbles, which is to do with iMessages. You've got that almost discrimination there between the types of phones, and it's quite interesting when you kind of break it down further.
It is. So it is indeed a very wide-ranging complaint, and indeed, Amelia, it covers several different aspects there in terms of, going into messaging. I made the mistake of losing far too much of my life reading a few threads on X this afternoon with various people who profess to have knowledge and skill with regards to messaging, sort of raging about, those messages are secure, are not secure, raging about whether SMS itself is even secure or not. And I think that's a sort of an academic argument for another day. But the point here is that the 88-page complaint is very, very wide-ranging. Whether you agree with the basis of the complaints and the action made by the Attorney General or not, the fact that this action is being taken by the US government is a significant step. In particular, when you think that Apple is one of the largest and most successful US corporations, it's almost we're talking about corporations turning over trillions and making billions. a company that sort of met its profit of is about 150 to 200 million every day. So we're talking about huge sums of money here and a huge amount of importance to the US economy. So I think sometimes the US government has taken the view of, well, we don't want to sort of harm the cash cow to a certain extent, particularly when things are more straightened economically, perhaps. But emboldened perhaps the all-round strength of the US economy at the moment, the Attorney General is feeling that some of these practices do need to be looked at. The interesting one with regards to cloud streaming, though, is one aspect of this that I find really interesting. The point here is, I think, a number of games providers have wanted to provide to their users the ability to have a really good, rich online gaming experience, regardless of the hardware that you've got. So the idea is that because the game is being run on cloud servers located in another location, you can pretty much access that, provided you've got a good, strong internet connection and a fairly low level of hardware. The idea is, even if you've got very sophisticated hardware of the type like an iPhone 15 or something, the idea is they've just designed a good gaming experience that will work on multiple different platforms. So therefore, you could be on a Android device or another device that doesn't have all the bells and whistles of that an Apple iPhone may have, but nonetheless, you can still take part in and enjoy the online streaming gaming experience. And it seems that Apple has never liked that, the fact that you didn't need to download anything or have any Apple proprietary system to do that. All you needed to do is just go to a web browser, access the system, and off you go. And it looks like various actions have been taken by Apple over the years to try and reduce this avenue of competition from these large game streaming platforms. So that sort of ties into the fact that, yes, Fortnite and other providers that are trying to put apples on the App Store and had tried to put apps on the App Store and had problems with that in the past. Many had then just gone down the way, okay, well, we'll just make it accessible through a browser. We won't try to play with the rules of the playground in terms of getting onto the App Store. And because the developers had circumvented the need to go on the App Store, then Apple's then thought, well, how do we make this more difficult for you in using browsers? And some of their practices there may have caught the attention of the US government, hence what the Attorney General is now looking to do. But certainly this is now going to be an action that isn't going to go away quickly or easily. And actually, it's interesting that the government is taking this action in the US in an election year, let's not forget. So if you want to turn around and say, we, the US government, are taking action, we're standing up for developers, we're standing up for the little guy, we're standing up for consumers against this big corporate behemoth, that fits in quite neatly with the sorts of political positions that President Biden may wish to take during the course of the coming year.
I certainly think it'd be interesting to keep following this story to see where there are updates, and equally whether any other countries decide to make a similar stance, because we are just talking about the US here, but throughout Europe there has been a certain level of distrust and animosity towards Apple for quite a long time. So whether this then spreads, we are yet to see.
Indeed. Amelia, you and I were looking earlier on to say a news story that had featured on the BBC website. The headline was great. Norfolk City Council, or Norwich, no, it was Norfolk County Council.
It was Norfolk, yeah.
Was the lead claimant on a big collective action against Apple. And it said, they win 385 million in iPhone row with regards to, again, sort of the operation of the App Store and the way that data was being used. They were the lead plaintiff in this action that had gone over
in 2020.
In 2020, and it was because the county council was the lead administrator in a pension fund, and the fact that pension fund, as an investor in Apple, may have had that stock price manipulated by some of the things that Apple had said and done in the past to try and influence stock price, etc. Blah blah blah. Very complex case. The point is, the headline says, the county council, as the lead claimant, has won 385 million, which on the face of it, you think, wow, that's a victory. And then you look and you see, actually, for a company that posted 97 billion of net income in the last financial year, 300 million represents about 2 days worth of profits. So it's
does not really fill
really
you with great amount of joy, does it? You see this great headline that's like, oh, okay, that's only equivalent of 2 days profit. Wow, okay.
4 years worth of legal work to get that far will have left a lot. And then you probably take out the legal costs from that as well. So not a huge amount probably will end up making its way to the pension fund and the investors. But and Apple knows that full well. But it's almost like all you need is that headline of the same with 385 million, and then the last paragraph that says Apple posted 97 billion in corporate profits last year.
I mean, at least it makes the little man feel like they're winning something, you know.
Yes, and then you realise it's actually a morsel from the table.
Moving then kind of back to the UK, we are looking at our next story. So a convicted paedophile who sent pictures, I won't go into the details of what sort of pictures, but
yes, please don't.
Pictures to a 15-year-old girl has become the first person to be jailed for cyber flashing in England and Wales. So the chap was a registered sex offender already, and he had sent unsolicited photos to a number of women, and they have actually now been jailed under the Online Safety Act that came into effect on the 31st of January. So this, interestingly, has been an offence in Scotland for a while, but this is the first time we're seeing this in England and Wales.
Yeah, so we'll draw a veil over the actual offence, which was rather unpleasant. You used to have to really feel for the victims here, particularly given that they were underage, receiving rather unpleasant images they didn't want, need, or ask for, and also the fact the perpetrator, was living at home and used his father's mobile phone to send these images to the people who, as I say, didn't want, need, or ask for the images. But the point is that under the Online Safety Act, something can actually be done about this. And indeed, this represents the first successful prosecution of cyber flashing in this way. And of course, it's receiving this publicity because you would hope it will become a deterrent to say that you do run the risk of a lengthy custodial sentence if you are caught perpetrating this kind of behaviour. And obviously then, even though they were an existing sex offender, if this were a first offence, again, you'd be going down as a sex offender, having to sign the sex offender register, and having to abide by the various conditions of that. So you would hope that this will become some form of deterrent, and indeed that it shows the value of the Online Safety Act, which had this incredibly tortuous history over 6 years of lobbying and redrafts and ping-pong balling from the Commons to the Lords and back again, and languishing in committees for so long. At least it's now in place, at least it is operating, and at least the Prime Minister and the government can point to one thing that is actually working, even if it might not perhaps be working in bulk yet. At least it's being used on crimes such as this. I think the other thing we should point out, though, is that the Online Safety Act, it isn't something that just means, the police can charge people with a broader array of crimes digitally than was the case before. So the regulator of the Online Safety Act is Ofcom. Take a look at Ofcom to see there are now sections in there that relate to for consumers in terms of what your rights are under the Online Safety Act and where the Online Safety Act applies, and then also for businesses. So in particular, say if you're operating a Apple website that processes images, processing data, that is collecting large amounts of information and how that information may be used and passed on to third parties. This is in effect just an extra tier of regulation. So in addition to sort of looking at what the Information Commissioner's Office says, and what UK GDPR or Data Protection Act say, or what the Privacy and Electronic Communications regulations say, you now need to think about the Online Safety Act depending on the activities that your business is undertaking. And it's worth taking a quick look at the Ofcom site just to see what that says in relation to online safety, as well as what also Ofcom says in terms of how you are carrying out things like general advertising and marketing, and whether it has a potential to fall foul of that.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next story. So we are looking at the hospital where the Princess of Wales had surgery, and this is where there has been a report that people have tried to access her private health information. So the Daily Mirror claims staff at the London clinic, which is frequently used by royals, including His Majesty the King, had attempted to access private medical records. So the Information Commissioner's Office that you'd already mentioned, Peter, they confirmed it had received a breach report and is making inquiries. And this is quite interesting based on our story last week where we discussed the Princess of Wales's botched Mother's Day image, which I believe we discussed at quite some length. So this is another kind of magnifying glass on the royals again.
Indeed, and this feeds into the rather unpleasant conspiracy theory information that's been swirling around on social media now for several months with regards to the Prince of Wales. It is worth remembering that when you've got organisations like hospitals, the NHS, as well as places like banks, insurers that often process very sensitive information about individuals, that information can sometimes be quite valuable to certain individuals. And in this instance, I mean, the key thing to remember here is that just because you may work in an institution like that doesn't mean that you can then just go on the database and look up anyone and see what the information is. So, this hospital, as you say, Amelia, has been trusted with providing care to the royal family for many generations. In this instance, it looks like 3 people who were not those who were directly administering care or on the team administering care to the Princess of Wales have tried to access the information on there to look up what those medical records may or may not say. And that is an offence, and that's what the ICO is now looking at, because it is a data protection breach. The same thing applies, for example, if someone was wanting to look at someone else's bank accounts, and that should be something that places like banks and financial institutions train its staff on. So that, for example, you can't sort of start working somewhere and go, oh, I wonder what my next door neighbour's bank account looks like. Oh, I wonder what they're borrowing. Oh, I wonder what their mortgage payments look like. You can't use it for those reasons. You can't go and look up, for example, a family member or friend's financial data, even though you may work there. That is a offence. So this is sort of reminding people of that. That's, I think, the main takeaway from this. But the second thing just to bear in mind is that I think it's an interesting compare and contrast with the level of digital scrutiny now that arguably the Princess of Wales is receiving is in many ways starting to match that the Princess Diana, the previous Princess of Wales, used to have back in the 1990s. And of course, that's back in the days before social media, the internet, and widespread technology now. But in those days, you still had huge volumes of photographs taken by paparazzi. Those would be published in newspapers, and literally the poor woman was in the press virtually every day, with sometimes quite hysterical headlines being made up just so that they could print her picture and the latest bizarre story that they could manufacture, seemingly thinking that that's what people wanted to see and read. And that was what happened. Arguably she was the most famous woman in the world for a couple of years, and we're almost getting to that point again now with Kate, and it's probably quite sobering, I can imagine, certainly for William and other members of for Prince William and other members of the royal family to see this happening. I also mentioned that for the reason that so not only have we had this issue of the Princess of Wales medical records being looked at, a photograph ended up being published this week of the Princess of Wales at a farm shop. So that wasn't an official engagement where it was, oh, I'm turning up to promote something, because she's supposed to be recuperating following surgery and has said, I will return to public life after Easter. That's currently before Easter. So I think that means, therefore, not currently engaged in public life.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, a photograph was taken that made its way into the newspapers, and they said, public interest, people are talking a lot about the Princess of Wales. So here is a picture of the Princess of Wales at a farm shop, which then leads to the conspiracy theories of, oh, look, it's not her. Look, she looks different. And it's like, well, no, it's just a public photograph taken in public where, there's not been preparation for a photo shoot, and therefore you can think, there hasn't been a costume designer, and there hasn't been makeup, and there hasn't been a big hat, and there hasn't been, someone making sure that she looks just right. So of course she's going to look different, as anybody would. But the point here is that since the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, there was an agreement amongst the press that they wouldn't publish private photographs taken in private of the royal family after that happened, and after a speech was made at Diana's funeral by her brother, Earl Spencer. But the sort of breaking of that unofficial covenant has been the taking and publishing of this photograph. So it'll be interesting to see now if that carries on, and if that sort of moratorium on that sort of behaviour has now passed or not, and what the position of the press will be. Is this a one-off publishing of that photo on these grounds of public interest, or are we returning to the days of the royal family in a goldfish bowl and photos being taken where and whenever the press can find them? And for those of us who remember it, that obviously led to rather harrowing things that happened in the 1990s. And for those who either weren't around or can't remember, take a look at season 6 of The Crown. Even if you aren't a fan of The Crown, it does accurately portray the media frenzy that used to follow the royal family and the Princess of Wales in particular.
Thanks, Peter. I think I'll certainly be interested to see what the ICO's kind of formal approach to this is, because it has confirmed obviously that they have received a breach report and it is making inquiries. So I'll be intrigued to see in the coming weeks what those inquiries uncover and whether there is any enforcement action brought against these individuals for accessing this information.
Indeed. Very briefly, there are horrible echoes here of the ongoing investigation into hacking by journalists, which is continuing to lead to court cases and significant large settlements against celebrities who had everything from their voicemails on their mobile phones being hacked to their phones themselves being hacked, to then things like the hacking in an impersonation of individuals to access their personal data. So that would include, for example, trying to get hold of individuals' medical records. We don't know who the 3 individuals who accessed these records were, but you can imagine, were they potentially thinking, or had they indeed been contacted by a journalist or a news organisation that says, if you can get hold of these records, we will pay you so many £1,000. Please, can you get hold of these records? And I'd be interested to see now, if in part of this investigation, if that sort of information comes out. Because if it does, it suggests that a lot of the work that the press has undertaken in recent years to say, we've changed and we don't engage in these rather grubby underhand tactics anymore, may not be entirely true.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next story, we're looking at a cyber attack at Leicester City Council. This has made it hard to access vital services, charities have said. So staff at the bridge, which works with homeless people, said that problems meant that some of the most vulnerable were struggling to get help, leading to stress and frustration. That's including the vulnerable being able to access kind of homeless shelters and actually homes themselves, which is quite worrying in terms of looking at the effects of cyber attacks in general, because according to them, the authority have confirmed that phone lines have been down since the 7th of March. At the time of recording this, we are on the 22nd of March. So already we're a couple of weeks into real big issues here.
Indeed. So the public sector continues to be as much risk as everyone else as regards to serious cyber attacks. And in this instance, when it happens, so for example, a ransomware attack, that it's not something that sort of is dealt with on the day. These things very often have consequences that last for weeks, months, and sometimes years, while organizations deal with the after effect. Have they lost data? Do they have to do a system reset or restore? Do you have a functioning backup that may or may not have been compromised by the original attack? Have you even done a full system reset before? Would you know what to do and how to do it? And that can, of course, be a major problem with a big, massive organization like a council in this instance. So it's a reminder that the consequences of these things when they happen are grave. It is a reminder of the importance of checking systems and resilience so that you can bounce back. And then, unfortunately, it is a rather unhappy reminder of the fact that very often it is the least fortunate in society, and in this instance, vulnerable people who are having difficulty accessing services, who end up paying the price for the attack in the first place.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to a very similar story, we are looking at the payments watchdog, and they are examining tech outages that have caused a chaos for a number of high-profile retail outlets over the weekend. So this includes Greggs, McDonald's, Tesco, Sainsbury's, and just before this recording, we saw that Nationwide are also having problems in terms of processing payments and specifically between banks. So you've clearly got a widespread issue here, and it's quite interesting to see.
Yes. So this has been a sort of, each day there's been fresh news about, which organizations have been compromised by this. It seems there may have been within some of the payment systems that are being used a security update that was rolled out between 7 and 10 days ago. bear in mind that a lot of organisations roll out these updates at different times onto their systems. So at first it was, I think, Tesco and Sainsbury's that was affected about a week ago on this. And then we've had Greggs being affected, we've had McDonald's. So it seems like other organisations seem to then be having problems processing bulk payments. And then the latest today is nationwide. So this appears to be an issue across the sector that is involved in the processing of payments. Very, very frustrating for consumers, of course. And sometimes it is a little reminder for organisations, particularly since the pandemic, we've had this sort of stampede sometimes to say, well, contactless is nice and quick and straightforward, and let's increase the minimum limit for a contactless payment, and let's do everything through these secure payment systems because it's quicker and it's easier, and it doesn't even, particularly after the pandemic, it was like, well, we don't have to move money from one person to another, and that could be infected and you might get COVID from it. Probably wasn't a thing, but back in 2020 when we were frightened of everything, including our own shadow, that was seen as a thing. And an awful lot of organisations stopped taking cash, and they are still not taking cash. And this is sometimes a little bit of a reminder that it might actually be a good idea to still be able to process cash, because then on the day when your snazzy, quick, contactless reader stops working, at least the transaction can still take place if you've got cash.
It'll be interesting based on this report now that we have got many different stores facing these problems, whether they actually do get to the bottom of what is going on here, because, we're not just talking about a few shops, we're talking about Greggs, McDonald's, Tesco, Sainsbury's, and now nationwide, all of which are massive giants in their own fields.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see whether reports do actually come out with, well, what is causing this?
Yeah. And I also think that it's sometimes tempting to sort of think, oh, well, it's only a minor inconvenience. Can you just imagine, in particular, say you are, in a fairly busy family and you work during the week, and then you've got kids to look after, and the weekend you've only got your 2 days off, and then some of that might be ferrying kids to music practice or sports clubs, rugby, or cricket, whatever. And then you might manage to get a few quick hours with your partner or whatever, and then it could be, I've got to go and do the shopping. Can you imagine, out of all that weekend, if you then spend an hour and a half wading around Sainsbury's or Tesco to get all the shopping in, and you've got at least one basket, possibly two, rammed full of stuff. You then get to the checkout and they go, oh, sorry, we aren't accepting payments. And you go, oh, and then you go, I've not got more than 20 quid in my personal wallet. Can you imagine the frustration of that?
I mean, now that you've said that, I'm thinking back to when I myself was checking out in Morrison's the other week, and other supermarkets are available, I will just add that in. But I was checking out and I got charged twice. And when I tell you, the level of peeved I was fairly tangible. I did go on a fairly nice rant to my mother because I was, again, not very happy. So if it was the opposite end of the spectrum, wherein I couldn't even pay for my groceries, I do feel I probably would have gone off on one, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I can really imagine how, one, you've got the consumer that's affected, but then two, you've got the store's bottom line, which is also being affected. Because, if your customers then lose faith in you, well, can't buy my groceries here, then you've got that as well.
Yeah, I'd be intrigued to know as well if this may have affected other services. So for those who are smugly going, this doesn't bother for me because I do click and collect or I do home delivery. Well, I think it may have affected those because I think there's been a few issues with regards to the volume of those spots available over the last few weeks as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if those sort of online payments were being affected as well, and the ability to then get your home delivery or do your click and collect is being impacted. So this has a knock-on impact to the delivery of services, and you suddenly realise how reliant we are on these services. And indeed, again, the pandemic showed us that civilization appears to be only about 48 hours from collapse when suddenly you can't get in your groceries.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our penultimate story of the day, we are looking at the Met Police. And Peter, you kind of let out an audible groan when I brought this one up. So a web form to complain about the Met Police accidentally revealed victims' data. So 394 people notified of potential personal data breaches. And according to the ICO, the data breaches were completely avoidable errors that have the potential to jeopardize public confidence in the criminal justice system. I mean, really? Wow, yes.
Yeah.
And due to the nature of the personal information that was made publicly accessible on the forms, the Met later notified 394 people that the data had been made valuable in error. However, they believe that there is no evidence that suggests that the data was ever accessed. Well, that's not the point, is it? It's the fact it was put out there in the first place.
And I think my first words to you were, it would be the Met, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Time does not allow for us to go into the litany of problems that the Metropolitan Police have had, some of which we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast before. But yeah, it is yet another issue for the Met. And talk about when it's not going your way. I mean, it would be victims' data
Of course.
that's affected here.
Yeah.
Not the criminals' data or suspects, etc. It's almost the victim's data that is just handled wrongly and breached or confused and mixed up, and this just adds to that overall impression of things not really working as they should, and indeed a sort of a certain sloppiness when it comes to handling the data of those who are the potential victims of crime. At least, I suppose one of the things is that we should at least think, well, because of the way that data protection laws work in the UK, at least this stuff does have to get reported and investigated. So we do end up finding out about it at least.
I think as well, then, whilst you said it is reported, it does mean that the Met will hopefully then pull their socks up, or you'd like to think so, at least in terms of, training people around how to deal with this type of data. And then for the future, carrying out similar exercises that the correct security measures and safeguards are in fact put in place to protect those victims, because otherwise we are just going to be going around in one vicious circle.
That's what you'd hope. I suppose our conclusions on that. I'm almost thinking to myself the naivety of youth. You'd hope that would happen, Amelia. However, I've been, sadly, he says, I've been in this field now for 20 years, and stories like this keep happening.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our final story, just to try and leave it on a bit more of an uplifting note.
Please.
So Tesco has been told to stop using its Club Card Prices logo after losing a long legal battle to its rival Lidl. So the German discounter had argued the Club Card logo of a yellow circle on a blue square infringed its copyrights and took unfair advantage of its reputation for great value. So customers can therefore expect to see a change to its Club Card Price logo in the coming weeks, as Lidl did in fact win the lawsuit, and therefore they will have to change the logo. I mean, speaking from experience here, as someone who, like you say, you shop everywhere to get the best prices at the moment, it does appear to me that in first impression, if you had a quick look at something, you would confuse the Lidl and Tesco logos, because they are very similar, and it appears that the courts think the same.
Yes, and I mean, it's interesting that I think this was only sort of in recent years, in sort of 2020 onwards. So again, once we had to rely, that the one place we could go for a good 18 months was you could go to a supermarket, even if you couldn't go anywhere else, and we should all stay at home. Keep referring to that wonderful period of time today. But the thing here is that, Tesco started to put out those little blue circles. And they'd catch you out at first because you think, oh, that means that packet of biscuits is reduced. So you buy it, and then you think, oh, that was only if I actually used the club card. Oh, I'd left the club card at home. I didn't have the thing on my keys, and I didn't have the app on the phone. So you weren't able to then, if you didn't scan the club card, you didn't get the price. And such is the success of this that now I think Tesco has loads of these offers when you go into a store. That the shelves are full of them, but then you sit in the small print is only to club card users. So if and I think also it's become a bit of a device, as you said earlier on, Amelia. It was almost like shove up the price so that you can then offer the discount.
Yeah, and then in case you didn't know, or you'd not been told before, the reason that Tesco and other related supermarkets are able to provide you the products for this price is the fact that they are collecting your personal data. And that is essentially how they are able to justify giving you products at those prices, both because they've already been,
And we should
raised.
just say there that we are not for a second alleging that Tesco deliberately raised its prices for no reason. There has been obviously 10% inflation in this country for the best part of 18 months. So price and supply chain issues. So yeah, prices are going to go up. But the point is that rather than just giving general, it used to be the time when, something's discounted, it was a discount for all customers. The fact it was then sort of segregating and saying, well, this is only for the special people with the club card. And then the fact that in order to get the club card, you have to hand over some rather rich sales data, which Tesco has then used to bolster its business over the last 20 years in terms of its sale patterns and prices, etc. There's a certain element to the transaction that meant there was rather more to it than met the eye. And just then by the sort of the use of this logo, it's kind of, the courts have kind of shown as well that they're going, look, we are not afraid to get involved in these sorts of disputes, and we are willing to we will not be swayed by the respective potential size of an organisation or where they're from or what they're doing, and we will just look on the face of these issues and make the rulings that we think are fair and fit at the time. And if that means that Tesco has to go and change the prices of millions of items on its store shelves, so be it.
So that was our last discussion for this episode. But if you would like to hear more from us, including subscribing to our newsletter, as well as receiving information about our subscriber-only podcasts, webinars, and events, then please subscribe to Premium via our Patreon channel using the link in the show notes. A big thank you to Answer and Evaluate for helping to produce this podcast. And if you'd like to produce your own podcast, webinar, or you'd be interested to hear more about Answer and Evaluate services, please take a look at their website that you can find at www.answerandevaluate.com. These episodes are available on our website, our YouTube channel, podcast channels such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon and Google Podcasts, and please feel free to leave us a review. And if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about today, please feel free to email us at admin@digitallawuk.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.